Hello everybody, this is WarriorDan. As you know, I tend to consider myself something of a variety game reviewer. I have my game genre preferences, but for the most part in regards to my game reviews, I tend to bounce around and critique a wide variety of games. One of the problems that can be associated with this format choice is that I often tend to see many mediocre, bad, and even dumpster fire-worthy games shoveled onto the Steam store like manure spread over a field. Often by developers that don't care for much else other than getting potentially a quick and fairly easy paycheck for their low-effort projects. As such, it can be a breath of fresh air now and then to encounter an indie developer that actually makes a conscious effort to take full advantage of Steam Early Access for its intended purpose, fostering ties with the community, gathering valuable community feedback, and subsequently updating the game with new fixes and improvements to help flesh out the game from its initial rough state. The game you're looking at now goes by the name of Folklore Hunter, but let's call it what it is, more or less. It's basically Finding Bigfoot, or I think they just call it Bigfoot now on Steam. Regardless, as longtime viewers of this channel might recall, I have a somewhat jaded history with the Bigfoot Steam game, with the developers having a horrible history of mass deleting comments and entire discussion posts on the game's official Steam forums, as well as instantly banning anyone critical of the game or anyone daring to suggest improvements. So when I randomly stumbled across this game on Steam while perusing the early access section at random, as I sometimes do whenever looking for new games to cover, I initially was highly skeptical but decided to give it a go, figuring, well, if it doesn't pan out, I'll just uninstall it and get a refund. And to my own surprise, it turned out to actually be a pretty decent game. Now I do want to be very clear here. The game is in very early development. During my initial attempts to play multiplayer with a friend, the game gave us no shortage of errors and technical mishaps. However, shortly after playing, I found a link to the game's official Discord group and joined. There, the developer was very active and highly responsive to questions or feedback. What took me by surprise was how open and eager he was to get feedback and act on it. Within a few hours after I and a handful of other people reported our multiplayer bugs, a hotfix patch was released, fixing the technical issues along with the developer also promising to address the other more non-essential complaints in a larger follow-up patch, which he has now delivered on. Now let's talk about the gameplay. As with any newly released early access game, the game may and hopefully will change a great deal between now and a year from now. So if you're watching this video a year or so after I've released it, don't start angrily typing into the comments that I don't know what I'm talking about, and the game looks loads better now. For today's purposes, I'm only interested in how good the core game actually is, now, early on. So that said, let's turn our attention towards the gameplay, shall we? When first loading up the game, and after having your hearing temporarily scarred by the main menu music, you can then choose to play the game in either a single player or in multiplayer co-op. Next, after setting up your lobby, you can pick which map you'd like to play on. Currently only one map exists in-game, although the game does visually reference a total of 4 playable maps, with the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th currently unavailable. Presumably they'll be added over the course of the early access period. Once you select the map, you'll be thrown into the game. You start out in a hunting cabin in the middle of the woods. The woods itself visually is quite impressive. Very well rendered, although the optimization still feels like it could use a bit of work. I didn't turn on a frame rate counter while playing, but it did feel like at times several of the animations seemed to be running at 30 FPS or lower, while the rest of the game ran at 60 and above. This is especially noticeable in regards to the player animations, although you can only observe this while in co-op multiplayer mode, because of course you can't view yourself in first-person mode, not really anyway. Some other models and surfaces appeared to likewise display non-high resolution quality, although for the most part this seemed to be a sporadic, limited issue. I suppose if there is one single problem, or more accurately, a single range of problems, it's the inconsistent bugs and quality of life issues present in the game. Personally, I'm not too bothered by this, as I expect bugs and quality of life problems in nearly any brand new early access game. That said, when playing with a friend gathering background footage for this review, I did run into a specific funny bug involving the Wendigo, one that is admittedly now being fixed and may indeed be fixed by the time this video goes live, yet it's still fun to laugh at. Whoa, behind you! Behind you! Behind you! I did not expect him to do that. Wait, where'd he go? I don't know what he's doing. I don't think he knows what he's doing either. I love this game already. Now he's doing the whole bounce and back and forth between the bed thing again. Just gonna sit back, have a drink, and watch this idiot go back and forth like a yo-yo. Bill, I'm off to Diagon Alley. Diagon Alley. And I'll just appear in Nocturne Alley.
Woof. Woof. Good. Now don't forget to speak very, very clearly. Diagonally. say, dear?
Diagonally.
As with any of my reviews, I don't point these issues out to mock the game or the developer, but rather to give you an honest accounting of my overall experience with the game. Speaking of the Wendigo, let's talk about what the game's all about, the hunting. The game, especially early on, is very much a slow build. You'll spend your first day in-game wondering what the bloody hell you're supposed to be doing, then night comes and you start hearing these, I wouldn't necessarily call them creepy, but certainly unsettling, children whispering sound effect loop. I know that the Wendigo, in what is usually Canadian mythology, can replicate human voices, and the myths indicate it will at times try to lure victims towards it by mimicking human screams for help, with the victims unwittingly running to their doom as they go to the aid of the would-be fellow humans. But I don't think anyone in their right mind would go wandering in near pitch-black darkness through the woods just to find the source of some echoey, ghostly-sounding children's voices. If I heard that BS coming my way, I'm locking and barring the door and popping some shells into my sawed-off shotgun. Let whatever is out there try to take a bullet spray to the face. Worst comes to worst, if it's actual ghosts, then it's still worth trying to convince them I'm not worth it, however unlikely the success probability may be. Now, the AI governing the Wendigo is, well, still kind of rough in some areas. One of the easiest determining metrics to use when distinguishing good enemy AI as opposed to bad enemy AI is whether you, the player, can, in the majority of instances, consistently predict the behavior of the AI to the point that any semblance of challenge can be factored out of the equation. After spending a few hours testing the extent of the Wendigo's AI programming, you do start to notice some extremely predictable behaviors over time, although it never quite reaches the point where it necessarily breaks the immersion, at least not entirely. The one time this becomes the most notable, and subsequently is the area I think the AI needs the most work, is during its passive state. During initial encounters with the player or players, the Wendigo tends to just hang back and stare at you from a distance, like a creepy guy at the gym, while not actually making an effort to get closer to you. At other times he'll spam that initially creepy but ultimately over time just irritating children's voice sound effect, while being nowhere nearby himself. It's like, what's the point? This first half of the game is easily the most low-key, underwhelming portion. Once you place down your cameras and traps, which usually doesn't take that long, you can mostly, if not entirely, skip the daytime segments, since literally nothing interesting happens during the day. I feel like the entire daytime segment needs a total gameplay rework. There should be more incentives for the player to remain mobile, because the current gameplay format seems to reward just standing on the porch of the house, surrounding the stairs with bear traps, and layering on strips of meat on top of them to attract the Wendigo. And while that can be fun the first half dozen times to try it, the lack of tactical variety isn't going to do much in regards to bolstering the game's replay value. The average match, I suppose you could call it, takes about 20 to 30 minutes. It's not a very long game. What helps keep the overall duration down is that the map is deceptively small. When you first look at the map, your first instinct is, good lord, how will I and my presumably equally inept co-op partner manage to traverse all of this? Well, the answer is that appearances can be, and in this case obviously are, misleading. From your cabin alone, if you look through the gaps between the trees during daylight hours, you will be able to see most of the map, save for the Wendigo's cave and a fairly small portion of land on the opposite side bordering the edge of the map. Now, if I'm playing a hunting game like this, I want to be able to truly immerse myself. A full gameplay run shouldn't turn out to be as short as the typical edited Let's Play video on YouTube, so that's definitely a major point of concern for me. I suppose it is sort of one of the game's most notable detractors, although I don't think it's a fatal one. In games like these, I enjoy having options. Sometimes I prefer playing straightforward, hardcore, getting right to the point, but other times I prefer to take it slow, roleplay a bit, and be a more patient hunter. And right now, there aren't a lot of options available to you in-game for how you want to play. Ironically, speaking of options, let's take a look at the options menu, shall we? And yes, in order to make this game even somewhat playable, you will need to familiarize yourself with the options menu. So for those of you who steadily find yourself becoming impatient with fiddling about in an options menu, well, I don't really know what to tell you. I don't know why you're even on the PC gaming platform to begin with. As you'll notice when first loading into the game, the mouse sensitivity by default is way too sensitive. So much as merely twitching your mouse one way or the other will cause your character to uncontrollably and drastically spasm towards whatever direction you're indicating. Since you're playing a game that oftentimes requires you to frequently turn about, it's best to turn the default mouse sensitivity to something more agreeable. I have mine set down so low, it's perhaps an inch from the bare minimum. And surprisingly, it's only at this excessively downsized sensitivity rate that your character begins to actually turn like a normal human being. While playing with my friend, he too had to make similarly intense adjustments to his mouse sensitivity, so I am comforted by the notion that this is not just a local issue on my end, but does seem to be a fairly universal problem present in the game. Now, likely around the time this video will be going live, there is a planned AI rework update that includes effectively a first pass attempt at adding a bit more sophistication to the currently questionable AI, and is intended as also a first step towards incentivizing the player to play more aggressively, and somewhat abandon this current player-driven hold-the-door metagame. But with the world not really offering a lot of other notable defensible locations, except perhaps in the newly added cave that presumably the Wendigo resides in, there's no other notable area in which players can effectively make use of their traps, which are a big gameplay mechanic. Now let's talk about the developers' plans for early access, because here's where I start to grow concerned and border on the edge of skepticism. The developer states that this game is currently planned to have a fairly short early access period, lasting roughly 6 to 8 months. In this span of time, the developer is intending to update the game with the following features: a fully voice-acted storyline and intro sequence, extra tools and equipment, improved AI awareness and capabilities, a larger map with more points of interest to discover. Now, considering we're only talking about one main developer and one assistant developer, a tag team of 2, that's obviously a lot to work on between the 2 of them, between now and November. When you also add in potentially other maps and monsters to the roadmap, I worry that this game runs the risk of being overly ambitious from the start. I just don't see a net gain to in-game hinting at other additional maps and monsters when your own roadmap doesn't indicate any confidence towards actually make those things a reality. On one hand, if you just leave those preview screens in-game for months or even a year, and release no details about when you plan to actually add them into the game, this may create restlessness within your community. However, if you preemptively remove them surreptitiously in a new patch, you'll take some heat for not standing by your own product, and this may shake up some of the goodwill you as a developer have slowly built up. It's effectively a catch-22, a no-win scenario. As a game that simultaneously finds itself attempting to be both a hunting game and a horror game, it tries to mix the two normally separate genres into one, and while the result is neither component at this time really seems to dominate, thus resulting in a game facing a rather substantial identity crisis. You can find tracks, but you don't really do a lot with them aside from some rudimentary intelligence gathering. You can't manually follow them because the Wendigo's Slenderman-like teleporting abilities make tracking a fruitless endeavor. You can't fire tracking bullets or utilize any other tool or ability to do the job for you and track the creature automatically. As for the horror elements, the Wendigo just honestly isn't that scary after the first couple of encounters. He just spams the same audio lines when he's not around. You can almost always visually see him coming with his burning red Lord Voldemort-like eyes. If the game wanted to go into a more classic old-school horror direction, as opposed to the hunting-oriented direction I just outlined, there are a number of ways this could be done, without an excessive amount of work required. One option could be to have mist form during the night, limiting the player's long-range vision and allowing the Wendigo to more easily catch players by surprise. This would require new environmental features not currently seen in-game, but not many changes to the existing AI. Another addition I would make if the game is intent on taking a more horror-driven direction would be to add more variations on the creepy sound effects. Also, if you really wanted to nail down the scare factor, implement hallucinations. Maybe during these misty dark nights you see a shadow running or moving about nearby, with specifically correlating sound effects. Sound is a horror game's best friend. Sound more than visuals can psychologically influence the player. We trust our sense of sound almost as much, if not more so, than our sense of sight. But I'm not the one making this game. It's not my vision, it's not my project, it's not my endeavor, and I claim no authority over it. I did not intend to make this video just to suggest improvements for where the game lacks. Yet as someone who loves to speculate, creating unusual out-of-the-box type suggestions is a fun intellectual exercise for me to undertake. Soon after I had recorded all this and was in the process of editing, the developer put out a major new update, addressing many of the criticisms I have already put forth here in this video. And while I could have just put out my original video with just an on-screen clarification, I figured it would be far better for the sake of honesty and transparency that I just add on to the original recording. The game does indeed seem to have at last picked a overall direction, and that is focusing on these survival mechanics. In a very recent update, the developer added in a new Resident Evil-style inventory system, something I believe I and a few others did mention in the Discord chat, so I'll greedily accept partial credit for that idea, for the sake of vanity. Either way, it's cool. Numerous new locations have been added, including a abandoned carnival, complete with a rideable Ferris wheel, and a new ruins area, as well as seemingly a new cave, in addition to the existing Wendigo cave we already had. I'm not ashamed to say that I, just like every other player when they discover it, took full advantage of an exploit by which the player, or players, as the case may be, ride the Ferris wheel and in doing so, make ourselves immune to the Wendigo's many attempted attacks. and when the opportunity presented itself, we were able to jump off the Ferris wheel, me doing so at more or less the very highest point, without taking any fall damage. What happens if I just, jumped?
You'd die.
But could you, bring me back?
Maybe. Why?
Test it. I'll beta test it.
I can't
He
even
just-
jump yet.
He jumped.
I lived!
Oh, you're at the bottom.
I told you that.
Oh.
I told you I said I jumped and I lived. And you guys are like, oh, you did?
I thought you went back into the Ferris wheel like
No.
a normal man would.
No, I simply stood at the bottom. I'm standing at the bottom. Hi.
I think he's run away.
Yeah, come jump down. Join us. Be one with
Oh,
it.
am I the only one? Am I the only one who's still at the top?
Yep.
Oh, you're both down there.
Yeah. We're both safe. Come on. Jump.
Oh.
There we go.
Oh.
I'm sure this will be fixed at some point soon, but at the moment, fall damage does not seem to apply even at such a great height. Now, seemingly as a means to balance out the presence of multiple new in-game locations, the developer has added in a mechanic wherein every night, one of the existing locations will disappear entirely, forcing you to relocate. Now, I am rather torn on this, because I think it kind of works, but not entirely. On one hand, it does force players away from the previously established meta of just lurking around in the house, but on the other hand, aside from the exploits available to the player when riding the Ferris wheel, none of the locations seem to offer any meaningful value. There are no location-specific weapons, ammo, or supplies. And aside from the two caves, neither of the two other locations give the player any noticeable advantage when facing off against a Wendigo, not in the same way that the house did. Now, given the relatively speedy frequency of these updates, I have no doubt that this, along with several other things, will probably get addressed fairly soon, but it's still worth mentioning. One other thing worth mentioning is that the Wendigo's mysterious teleporting ability does seem to have been removed, or at the very least, significantly altered, so you won't see him moving around the map like Slender Man so much anymore. This is definitely a major improvement in my opinion, as it's difficult enough to hunt the bastard without him popping in and out of existence seemingly on a whim. Probably my favorite new addition, setting aside the new carnival location of course, is the fact that players can now actually die, something that up till now was seemingly an impossibility. Also, players can bring other players back to life, so that's cool. On a final note here, crafting has been added into the game. I have not personally tested this and I've been unable to discover how it works or how to take full advantage of it, but I am hoping that this gets a little bit more fleshed out. Maybe allow the player to craft bandages or healing potions using various plants gathered from within the world, etc. Or maybe allow players to craft special stimuli enhancers that would act as almost a natural night vision, allowing them to more easily see other players, creatures, and of course the Wendigo. Right now, if crafting exists, it's to such a limited degree that it doesn't seem to play much of a role in influencing the outcome of the game. Hopefully this will be improved on and expanded upon in future updates. That said, I'm going to cut back to my previous recording. Cheers. At the end of the day, I find myself hopeful that Folklore Hunter does gradually continue building out its small, close-knit community, and perhaps even usurp existing games like Bigfoot, because to hell with that team. Their year-long inactivity between updates and their toxicity towards the community means I'm more than ready to vote them out of office and name Folklore Hunter as the champion of, well, its kind of genre. Folklore Hunter is definitely very rough in some areas, but it's already a very competent and at times even enjoyable small-budget game, and seemingly every week it continues to improve. Would I recommend it to those interested in games like Bigfoot or Witch Hunter? Yeah, absolutely, because I think this game will appeal to you. But it is admittedly a niche thing, so again, if it appeals to you, great, but if not, no worries. It kind of just depends on your own interest in hunting/horror-themed games like the ones I mentioned. The game is currently listed on Steam at the fairly modest and reasonable retail asking price of $11.99 USD. The game currently does state on its Steam page that there will likely be a small price increase once the game exits early access, with the increase presumably aimed to be proportional to the amount of content added during the early access stage. If the game attempts to add the trifecta of additional currently missing maps, along with presumably other similar monsters to hunt, I could see this rising to potentially a $19.99 price point. Although if the decision is made to scale back and just focus on the Wendigo, but still include additional maps, I think it would be reasonable to not charge any higher than $14.99. But without a clear roadmap ahead, this is merely idle speculation. At any rate, that's where I'm going to wrap up this video for today. If you found this video informative or otherwise entertaining, please do hit the like button, I appreciate it, I really do. And if you want to see more review videos like this one in the future, click the subscribe button and hit the bell to get notifications as soon as I upload a new video like this one in the future. YouTube's default notification system is frankly terrible nowadays, so signing up for manual notification is currently one of the only workarounds you can find. As always, let me know what you think of the game in the comments down below. Unlike seemingly most of YouTube, I actually do see and take time to respond to comments where I can. So if you're looking to get my attention, you can definitely do so in the comments section down below. On a final note, I do want to say thank you for your continued support. The channel has been doing great lately. Views are up, watch time is up, and the channel just crossed 475 subscribers. I'd been hoping to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year, however at this rate, it's likely I'll be surpassing that margin by a considerable degree. This is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome everybody, and peace out.